You never forget the silence of lowering a coffin small enough for a child. While I buried my 9-year-old son, my parents were popping champagne at my sister's engagement party. But the real blow wasn't their absence. It was the text they sent demanding control of his $850,000 trust fund. They didn't just skip his funeral, they waited until I was on my knees to rob me. My name is Madeline Ross, and standing here in the damp grass of Maple Hollow Cemetery, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I was 34 years old, but looking at the small rectangular hole in the ground, I felt ancient, withered by a grief so heavy it seemed to have its own gravitational pull. The morning air in Columbus, Ohio, was thick with a gray mist that clung to my coat and chilled the tears on my cheeks. But I barely registered the temperature. The cold outside was nothing compared to the freezing void that had opened up inside my chest. For the last 18 months, my existence had been defined by the sterile rhythm of the oncology ward. My internal clock was no longer set by day and night, but by the schedule of medication doses, the rhythmic beep of monitors, and the terrifying fluctuations of white blood cell counts. I had lived in a world of fluorescent lights and hushed conversations, bargaining with a universe that refused to listen. There had been moments of blinding hope followed by crushing despair, a cycle that spun faster and faster until it suddenly, violently stopped. The silence now was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Noah was gone, my 9-year-old boy, who loved space facts and grape popsicles, was inside that polished wood box, and I was left standing here with a heart that was still beating but felt like it should have stopped out of solidarity. I looked around the small cluster of folding chairs set up on the muddy ground. There were 20 chairs arranged in neat rows, but they were mostly empty. The emptiness was a physical blow. My father, Walter Ross, was not here. My mother, Diane Ross, was not here. My younger sister, Tinsley, was not here. The people who shared my DNA, the people who claimed to be the bedrock of our family unit, had vanished completely. There were no excuses, no flat tires, no sudden illnesses. They simply chose not to be here. A masochistic impulse, born of a need to confirm the cruelty I was sensing, made me reach for my phone inside my black wool coat pocket. My hand trembled as I tapped the screen. The harsh blue light cutting through the gloom of the cemetery. I opened Instagram. I did not even have to search for it. The first circle at the top of my feed was Tinsley's. I tapped it, and the silence of the graveyard was shattered by the tinny sound of upbeat jazz coming from my speaker before I frantically turned the volume down. The video on the screen was bright, golden, and sickeningly joyous. The location tag read, "The Halcyon Ballroom." It was a venue on the other side of town, known for its crystal chandeliers and exorbitant rental fees. On the screen, Tinsley was spinning in a white dress that looked suspiciously like a bridal gown, holding a glass of champagne high in the air. Her other hand was extended to show off a massive diamond ring that caught the light. In the background, blurred but unmistakable, were my parents. My father was laughing, his head thrown back in a way I had not seen in years. My mother was clinking glasses with a group of well-dressed guests, her face flushed with the excitement of social climbing. They looked radiant. They looked relieved. They looked like a happy family celebrating a new beginning, completely unburdened by the fact that their grandson was being lowered into the earth 10 miles away. I felt bile rise in my throat. I wanted to scream, to hurl the phone against a tombstone, but I had no energy left for rage. Not yet. A warm, rough hand touched my elbow, grounding me before I could collapse. I turned to see Mrs. Loretta Pike standing beside me. She was 72 years old, wearing a sensible raincoat that had seen better decades and a hat pulled low against the drizzle. Loretta was my neighbor, a retired nurse's aide who had spent 40 years changing bedpans and holding the hands of the dying. She was not blood. She was not family in the legal sense. Yet, she was the only one here. She was the one who had come over at 2 a.m. when Noah's fever spiked. She was the one who had sat in the hospital chair, knitting quietly, forcing me to go take a shower or sleep for 20 minutes because she knew I was hallucinating from exhaustion. Loretta did not say anything. She just squeezed my arm, her grip firm and anchoring. She looked at the phone in my hand, saw the frozen image of my laughing mother, and then looked at me with a sadness that was profound and knowing. She did not offer empty platitudes. She knew there were no words for this kind of betrayal. I looked back at the casket. A memory hit me. Sharp and sudden. It was from 6 months ago, during a rare good week when Noah had enough energy to sit up and build a Lego set. He had looked at me, his eyes huge in his thin face, and said, "Mom, when I get big, I am going to be a doctor. I am going to fix the other kids so they do not have to stay in bed like me. I promise." I had smiled and agreed, holding back tears, knowing even then that the odds were stacking against us. That promise, that beautiful, innocent ambition, was the reason the money existed. Gavin Mercer, my ex-husband and Noah's father, had been a complicated man. He was absent for the hard days, unable to handle the reality of a sick child, but he had been precise in his financial guilt. He had set up an irrevocable trust fund for Noah, $850,000. It was a staggering amount of money. It was meant to pay for medical school. It was meant for a first house. It was meant for a wedding Noah would never have, and a life he would never lead. Gavin's parents had contributed to it as well, ensuring their grandson would never want for anything. The legal documents were clear. The money was locked down for Noah's benefit. But there was a clause. If the worst happened, if Noah did not survive to age 25. I was the successor beneficiary. It was not money I ever wanted. I would have given every single penny, plus my own limbs, just to have Noah hold my hand one more time. My phone buzzed again in my hand, vibrating against my palm like an angry insect. I looked down, expecting a condolence message from a coworker or a distant friend. It was a text message from my mother. The timestamp was 1 minute ago. She must have sent it between sips of champagne. I read the words, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Bring the trust paperwork over tomorrow morning. We need to settle things for the wedding. Do not be dramatic about today. Family comes first." I stared at the screen. The letters blurred and then sharpened into razor blades. They did not ask how I was. They did not apologize for missing the burial. They did not mention Noah's name. "Do not be dramatic." That is what she called burying my child. Drama. They knew about the trust. Of course they knew. They had been circling it for months, making vague comments about how expensive Noah's care must be, asking if I had access to the big funds yet. I had always shut them down, telling them it was for Noah's future. Now, Noah had no future, and they had decided the money belonged to Tinsley's wedding. They had skipped his funeral, but they were already planning how to spend his legacy. I looked at the small, dark hole in the ground. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the one thing I had kept to bury with him. It was his favorite toy, a small, battered plastic astronaut that he had carried to every chemotherapy session. I stepped forward and placed it gently on the polished wood of the casket. "Goodbye, my baby," I whispered, my voice cracking. "You are safe now." I straightened up and wiped the rain from my face. The numbness was receding, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I looked at the text message one last time before sliding the phone back into my pocket. They thought I was weak. They thought 18 months of grief had hollowed me out until there was nothing left but a shell they could crush. They thought they could demand my son's money to pay for their party while his body was not even cold. They were wrong. I turned to Loretta, my eyes dry now. "We should go. Loretta, I have things to prepare." I was not just a grieving mother anymore. I was the guardian of my son's memory, and I silently vowed that they would never touch a single cent of what belonged to him. They wanted the papers. I would bring them the papers, but they were not going to get the surrender they expected. Noah was gone, but his mother was still here, and she was done crying. The drive to Westbridge the next morning felt like moving through a vacuum. The silence in my car was absolute, amplified by the ringing in my ears that had not stopped since the cemetery. Westbridge was the kind of suburb where the lawns were manicured to within an inch of their lives, and the silence was enforced by homeowner association bylaws. It was quiet, but it was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of secrets kept behind triple-paned glass. When I pulled into the driveway of the house I grew up in, my stomach turned over. I expected to see family cars, maybe a few neighbors dropping off casseroles, the standard choreography of post-funeral support. Instead, there was a sleek silver Lexus parked right next to my father's sedan. I knew that car. It belonged to Maren Sloan. Maren and I had been best friends in high school. We had shared lockers, secrets, and a hatred for gym class. But over the years, as my life became consumed by hospital visits and insurance battles, Maren had drifted into Tinsley's orbit. She was now a high-end event planner, the kind who charged 5 figures just to design a mood board. Her presence here, less than 24 hours after I buried my son, was not a social call. It was business. I walked to the front door, my keys heavy in my hand. I did not knock. I stepped into the foyer, and the temperature hit me first. The air conditioning was set to a frigid chill, scrubbing the air of any warmth or smell. There was no scent of lilies, no aroma of comfort food. It smelled like lemon polish and cold ambition. "In here, Madeline," my father's voice called out from the living room. It was not a greeting, it was a summons. I walked in. The living room, usually a shrine to my mother's obsession with beige upholstery, had been rearranged. The coffee table was cleared of its usual decorative books and was now covered in neat stacks of paper. My father, Walter Ross, sat in his leather armchair, looking less like a grieving grandfather and more like a CEO presiding over a hostile takeover. My mother, Diane, sat on the sofa, her posture rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Maren Sloan was perched on the edge of the ottoman, clutching a tablet to her chest. She looked up at me, offered a tight, pained smile that did not reach her eyes, and then looked down at the carpet. No one said a word about yesterday. No one said Noah's name. It was as if my son had never existed, as if the last 2 years of hell had been a hallucination I had suffered alone. "Sit down," Walter said, gesturing to the empty armchair opposite him. I remained standing. "You texted me to bring the trust documents. I have them in the car. But I want to know why Maren is here." "Maren is helping us coordinate," Diane said, her voice soft, the kind of tone one uses with a frightened animal or a volatile patient. "She is family, essentially, and we have a lot to get through." Walter leaned forward and slid a thick document across the coffee table toward me. It was already clipped open to the signature page. A heavy Mont Blanc pen lay beside it, cap removed, waiting. "We need to be practical. Madeline," Walter said, his voice level and devoid of emotion. "We have reviewed the terms of the trust Gavin set up. Currently, you are the successor beneficiary. That is a lot of responsibility for someone in your condition." "My condition?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You are grieving," Walter stated, as if diagnosing a mechanical failure. "You are not thinking clearly. You have been out of the workforce for 2 years. You are emotional, volatile. Managing a sum of nearly $900,000 is not something you can handle right now. This document transfers the trustee rights to Tinsley, with Mother and me as overseers. It is for your own protection." "To Tinsley," I repeated, the absurdity of it tasting like copper in my mouth. "You want me to sign Noah's money over to Tinsley?" "It is not Noah's money anymore." "Sweetheart," Diane interrupted, leaning forward. "He is gone. We have to think about the living. Tinsley has a future to build, and you know how much this wedding means to the family image. It is what Noah would have wanted, to see his aunt happy." The manipulation was so sharp it almost drew blood. Using my dead son to fund my sister's vanity project, before I could respond. Tinsley walked in from the kitchen. She was wearing a silk robe and holding a mug of herbal tea, looking every inch the fragile bride-to-be. She did not look at me. She looked at Maren. "Did you call the florist about the archway?" Tinsley asked, her voice trembling with performative stress. "If we do not put the deposit down by noon, We lose the white hydrangeas. I am handling it, Marin whispered, tapping furiously on her tablet. Tinsley finally turned to me, her eyes widening with practiced sympathy. Maddie, I am so glad you are here. I know you are hurting, but you have to understand the pressure I'm under. This wedding is in 3 months. The deposits are due. The family needs this celebration. We need to heal. Together. She reached out as if to touch my arm, but I took a step back. That was when I saw it. Underneath the thick document my father wanted me to sign, another piece of paper was sticking out. It was a heavy, cream-colored cardstock, the kind used for high-end invoices. I reached down and snatched it before Walter could stop me. It was a budget estimate from the Halcyon Ballroom. My eyes scanned the numbers. The total cost was astronomical, but it was the line item at the bottom that made my breath catch in my throat. Immediate non-refundable deposit due. $60,000. Payment deadline. 48 hours. I looked up at them. The timeline clicked into place. They did not just want the money eventually, they needed it today. You are broke, I said, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. That is what this is. You overspent on the engagement party. You booked a venue you cannot afford. You do not have the money for this wedding. The room went deadly silent. Tinsley's face flushed a deep, ugly red. That is irrelevant, Walter snapped, his calm facade cracking. The point is that the money is sitting there, doing nothing. You are going to sign that transfer. Madeline, and if I do not? I challenged, gripping the invoice. It is my money now, legally. It is mine to use for charity, or to burn, or to bury in the backyard if I want to. You have no claim to it. Walter stood up. He was a tall man, used to using his physical presence to intimidate his subordinates. And now he was using it on his daughter. If you do not sign that paper voluntarily, he said, his voice dropping to a low growl, we will file a petition for emergency guardianship this afternoon. We have already spoken to a judge who is a friend of the firm. We will argue that the death of your child has caused a psychotic break. We will say you are a danger to yourself and your finances. We will have you declared mentally incompetent. Diane nodded in agreement, tears welling up in her eyes on cue. We would hate to do it. Madeline, it would be so embarrassing for you. Public records, a psychiatric evaluation. Just sign the papers, and we can keep this private. We are trying to help you. I looked at them. My father, the bully, my mother, the accomplice, my sister, the parasite, and Marin, the witness. They were not a family. They were a corporation facing a liquidity crisis, and I was just an asset to be liquidated. You would lock me up, I said, my voice steady, though my hands were shaking. You would put me in a facility just to get your hands on that trust. We would do what is best for the family, Tinsley said, her voice sharp. Stop being selfish. Noah is dead. He does not need the money. I am right here. I looked at the invoice in my hand, then at the transfer document on the table. I dropped the invoice back onto the pile. I am leaving, I said. If you walk out that door, Walter threatened, I will have the papers filed by 5 o'clock. Do what you have to do, I said, turning my back on them. I walked out of the house, the cold air of the foyer hitting my face. I did not run. I walked deliberately to my car. As I started the engine, I looked back at the house. It stood perfectly still, a monument to suburban perfection. But now I knew what was inside. They had not come up with this plan yesterday. You do not draft transfer documents and line up a friendly judge overnight. They had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. They had been betting on Noah dying before the deposit due date. They had been counting the days of my son's life like a countdown clock to their payday. I backed out of the driveway, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. They thought they had cornered me. They thought the threat of a psych ward would break me. But as I drove away from the silent, manicured streets of Westbridge, I did not feel broken. I felt something I had not felt since the diagnosis. I felt focused. Kerrigan and Low Council was located in a brick building downtown that smelled of old paper and expensive coffee. It was the kind of place where people spoke in hushed tones and careers were made or broken on the strength of a clause. I did not go there to cry. I went there to arm myself. Miles Kerrigan did not offer me a tissue when I walked into his office. He was a man in his late 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that looked like they had scanned 1,000,000 contracts for loopholes. He did not ask how I was holding up or offer condolences on the loss of my son. Instead, he pointed to the chair opposite his mahogany desk and opened a file folder. "Time is a factor," Miles said, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. "If they are threatening an emergency guardianship, they are moving fast. I need you to be faster. When exactly did they first approach you about the trust fund?" "Yesterday," I said, sitting down and keeping my back straight. "At the cemetery. My mother texted me right after the burial." "Show me," he said, extending a hand. I unlocked my phone and handed it to him. Miles scrolled through the messages, his face impassive. He stopped at the text from my mother, the one telling me not to be dramatic, and then scrolled back further. "Keep going back," he muttered. "Is there anything else? Any mentions of money? Any requests for loans?" "Not directly," I explained. "Just comments about how expensive the wedding was getting. Tinsley mentioned a few times that the venue required a large deposit, but they never asked for the trust money explicitly until Noah died." Miles handed the phone back to me and leaned back in his chair. He tapped a pen against the desk in a rhythmic, irritating beat. "Gavin Mercer was a lot of things, but he was not stupid," Miles said. "He filed a statement of intent with this firm 5 years ago when the trust was established. It is a notarized document that accompanies the trust deed. It explicitly states that the funds are for the health, education, and maintenance of Noah Mercer. It also designates you, Madeline Ross, as the primary caregiver and protector of those interests. If Noah passes, you become the sole beneficiary, not your parents, not your sister. You—" "I know that," I said. "But they are saying I am incompetent. They are saying grief has made me unstable." Miles stopped tapping the pen. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "That is their angle. They cannot touch the money legally because the trust is ironclad. So, they have to break the person holding the keys. If they get guardianship over you, they get check-writing authority over your assets. That includes the trust." He turned his computer monitor so I could see the screen. It was a log of incoming calls to the firm, a digital record of everyone who had tried to contact Kerrigan and Lowe regarding the Mercer file. "This is the part you do not know," Miles said, pointing to a series of entries highlighted in yellow. "Standard procedure for us is to log every inquiry regarding a high-value trust. Look at the dates." I leaned in. The first entry was from 14 months ago. Caller: Walter Ross. Inquiry: procedures for removing a trustee due to medical negligence. My breath caught in my throat. 14 months ago, Noah had just relapsed. We were in the middle of aggressive chemotherapy. "Look at the next one," Miles commanded. Caller: Diane Ross. Inquiry: contingency clauses for beneficiary death and timeline for fund release. That was 8 months ago. "And this one," Miles said, pointing to an entry from just 3 weeks ago. Caller: Tinsley Ross. Inquiry: verification of total asset value. I stared at the screen, the white light burning into my retinas. They had not just decided to take the money yesterday, they had been circling like vultures while my son was still breathing. While I was holding a basin for Noah to be sick in, my father was calling a lawyer to ask how to remove me, while I was praying for remission. My mother was asking how fast the money would be released if Noah died. "They were waiting," I whispered. "They were waiting for him to die." "They were betting on it," Miles corrected, his voice hard. "And they were preparing the ground. They knew the trust would revert to you. So they planted the seeds of your incompetence early. They probably have a file of their own. Incidents where you seemed overwhelmed. Times you snapped at them. Missed appointments. They are building a narrative. Madeline, they're gaslighting you on paper. weaponizing filings instead of whispers. I felt a cold rage settle over me, heavier and more solid than the grief. They did not just want the money, they wanted to erase my autonomy to get it. They were willing to declare me insane, to ruin my future, just to pay for a party at the Halcyon Ballroom.
So how do we stop them? I asked. We do not just stop them, Miles said, closing the file with a sharp snap. We let them walk into a trap. They want to argue that you are unstable? Fine. We will show the court that you are the most rational person in the room. But first, we need to secure your position. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to any mental health evaluations unless ordered by a judge. And we need witnesses, credible ones, not family. Loretta, I said immediately. Mrs. Loretta Pike, she is my neighbor. She was there every day. Get her, Miles said. If she saw you parenting, she is our shield. I left the office and drove straight to Loretta's small bungalow. The house smelled of lavender and old books. When I told her what Miles had shown me, the call logs, the dates, the inquiries, Loretta did not look shocked. She looked resigned. She went to a small wooden secretary desk in the corner of her living room and pulled out a thick, leather-bound notebook. She handed it to me. I kept a log, Loretta said simply. Nurse's habit. I started it when you brought Noah home from the first round of treatment. I wanted to track his vitals in case you needed backup. I opened the book. The pages were filled with Loretta's neat, cramping handwriting. October 14th. Noah fever, 101. Madeline administered meds at 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 6 a.m. She is exhausted but alert. Kitchen is clean. Meds are organized. November 3rd. Walter and Diane visited for 10 minutes. Made Noah cry by asking about his hair loss. Madeline asked them to leave. She handled it calmly. She is protecting that boy like a lioness. January 20th. Tinsley stopped by. Asked to borrow Madeline's car while Noah was in procedure. Madeline said no. Tinsley shouted in the driveway. Madeline went back inside to read to Noah. It was all there, every day, every dose, every moment of my so-called instability, documented as fierce, competent caregiving. This, I said, looking up at Loretta with tears finally stinging my eyes, this proves everything. They are not going to take you down. Honey, Loretta said, placing a hand on my shoulder. I will testify. I will tell any judge in this state that you were the only one keeping that boy alive while they were out shopping for centerpieces. My phone buzzed. It was Miles. I have a strategy. The text read, we need to meet them. Public place. High visibility. Let them think you are cracking. We need them to say the quiet part out loud. I typed back, Juniper Street Coffee. Tomorrow at 10. I looked at the logbook in my lap. The evidence of my love was written in ink. The evidence of their greed was written in call logs. Thank you, Loretta, I said. Do not thank me yet, she replied. Her face grim. Just promise me one thing. When you take them down, make sure they stay down. Oh, they will, I promised. I am going to make sure the whole world sees them for exactly what they are. The pieces were moving on the board now. They had the element of surprise initially. But I had the truth, and I had the receipts. They thought they were dealing with a grieving mother who could be bullied into submission. They were about to find out that grief does not just break you. Sometimes, it forges you into something unbreakable. I picked up my phone and sent a message to the family group chat. The first one in days. Let us meet. I want to discuss the trust. Juniper Street Coffee. Tomorrow. It was time to go to war. Juniper Street Coffee was exactly what Miles Kerrigan had ordered. It was loud, chaotic, and aggressively public. The air smelled of burnt sugar and roasted beans, and the din of espresso machines and chatter provided a sonic shield. More importantly, I had counted 3 security cameras pointing directly at the corner booth where my family was waiting. I walked in 5 minutes late. It was a small power play, but it felt necessary. My father, Walter, was checking his watch, his face tight with impatience. My mother, Diane, was picking at a croissant she had no intention of eating.
Tinsley was scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving with manic speed, while Marin Sloane sat beside her, calm and watchful, like a handler with a volatile animal. They all looked up as I approached. Their eyes did not go to my face. They went immediately to the thick manila envelope I was clutching in my left hand. "You made it," Tinsley said, her voice pitched a little too high. "We were worried. Did you bring the papers?" I did not answer immediately. I slid into the empty chair across from them, placing the envelope in the center of the table. I kept my hand resting on it. "I brought what was necessary," I said calmly. Walter leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. He tried to summon a look of paternal concern, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good. I am glad you are being reasonable. Madeline, we know this is hard, but getting these administrative details out of the way will help you move on. We just want to protect you." "Protect me," I repeated flatly. "Like you protected Noah?" Diane flinched. "Madeline, please, not here. People are watching." "Let them watch," I said. "You wanted the trust documents signed over to Tinsley. You said I was not stable enough to manage the funds. You said the family needed the money." "It is for the wedding," Tinsley interjected, her eyes darting to the envelope under my hand. "But it is also an investment. In our future. In your future. Maddie, you cannot handle $850,000 right now. You are grieving. You are making irrational decisions." "Am I?" I asked. I opened the clasp of the envelope. I could see the relief wash over them. Tinsley actually sat up straighter, reaching into her purse, presumably for a pen. Marin shifted slightly, ready to witness the signature, but I did not pull out the transfer documents. Instead, I pulled out a single, high-resolution photograph printed on glossy cardstock. It was a screenshot of Tinsley's Instagram story from 2 days ago. I had blown it up so every detail was crisp. The timestamp in the corner read 10:42 in the morning. I slid the photo across the table. "At 10:42 on Tuesday morning," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I was watching the cemetery workers lower my son into the ground. At that exact moment, according to this timestamp, you were here," I pointed to the photo, "at the Halcyon Ballroom, toasting with champagne." The silence at the table was heavy, heavier than the noise of the coffee shop around us. Tinsley stared at the photo, her face draining of color. Walter's jaw tightened. "We were grieving in our own way," Diane said quickly, her voice trembling with a rehearsed fragility. "We could not bear the cemetery. Madeline, it was too painful. We wanted to celebrate Noah's life, not his death. We did it for you, really, to keep the energy positive." "You did it for me," I said, letting the words hang there. "You skipped his funeral to tour a wedding venue, and you posted it on social media. It was a scheduled site visit," Tinsley snapped, her composure cracking. "We could not move it. The Halcyon has a 2-year waiting list. If we missed that appointment, we would have lost the date." "So a venue tour was more important than your nephew's burial," I clarified. "You are twisting things," Tinsley hissed. "You are being selfish. Do you have any idea how much pressure I am under? The sponsors are breathing down my neck." The word hung in the air. Sponsors. I looked at Marin, then back at Tinsley. "Sponsors? Since when does a wedding have sponsors?" Tinsley realized her mistake immediately. She clamped her mouth shut, but the damage was done. "We have brand partnerships." Marin Sloane spoke up for the first time, her voice cool and professional. "Local vendors, a bridal magazine feature, they require certain deliverables, a specific venue tier, a certain aesthetic. It is a business arrangement as much as a celebration." "And the deposit?" I asked, looking at the budget sheet I had memorized. "The $60,000 due tomorrow?" "If we do not pay it by 5 o'clock on Friday, we lose the venue," Tinsley blurted out, desperation leaking into her tone. "And if we lose the venue, the magazine pulls the feature. We lose the catering discount. We lose everything. Madeline, Carter and I have leveraged everything on this." "So you are not worried about my mental health," I said, leaning back, You are worried about your down payment. You are broke. And you overextended yourself for a magazine spread. Walter slammed his hand down on the table. It was not loud enough to stop the music, but it made the couple at the next table look over. Enough, he growled. This is not about magazines. This is about capacity. Look at you. Madeline, you are obsessed. You are paranoid. You are tracking our movements, printing out screenshots like a detective. This proves you are not well. You are not fit to manage nearly $1 million. I read the trust terms. Dad, I said, cutting him off. I pulled a second sheet of paper from the envelope. It was a photocopy of the clause Miles had highlighted. Clause 4B. The trustee can only be removed upon proof of criminal negligence, death, or a court-ordered declaration of incompetence. It does not say anything about being sad. It does not say anything about the family needing money for a party. I pushed the paper toward him. You cannot just bully me into signing, and you cannot guilt me into it. The only way you get this money is if a judge declares me insane. Walter looked at the paper, then at me. His face changed. The mask of the concerned patriarch dropped completely, revealing the cold, calculating man underneath. Do not think I won't do it, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was far more terrifying than a shout. You are walking a very thin line, young lady. We have witnesses. We have Marin here, who has seen you fall apart. We have your history of depression after the diagnosis. If you force us to go to court, we will air every dirty laundry basket you have. We will paint you as a hysteric who cannot be trusted with a checkbook, let alone a fortune. And when we win, and we will win, you will not just lose the money, you will lose your freedom. We will put you under a conservatorship so fast your head will spin. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my hands to remain still. This was the threat Miles had predicted. They were showing their hand. So that is the plan, I said. You destroy my reputation to pay for Tinsley's wedding. We do what is necessary for the survival of this family, Diane said, her eyes hard. You are being an obstruction. Madeline, Noah is gone. He does not need the money. Tinsley is here. She is alive. She has a future. Noah had a future too, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. Until he didn't, and that money is his legacy. It is not a piggy bank for your vanity. I stood up. I picked up the envelope, leaving the photo of the Instagram story on the table as a parting gift. I am not signing anything, I stated clearly, loud enough for Marin to hear. I am not transferring the trust, and I am done listening to your threats. From this moment on, if you want to speak to me, you call Miles Kerrigan. You are making a mistake, Walter warned, not standing up. You are going to regret this. The only thing I regret, I said, looking at my mother, is waiting for you at the cemetery. I turned and walked away. I did not look back, but I could feel their eyes boring into my back. As I reached the door, I glanced at the reflection in the glass window. I saw Marin Sloan watching me. She did not look angry. She did not look worried. She looked at me with a cold, clinical detachment, like an engineer assessing a bridge that had failed to collapse on schedule. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. I stepped out into the cold air of the street. My legs trembling, I had won the battle at the coffee shop, but as I walked to my car, I knew the war had just begun. Marin's look told me everything I needed to know. Plan A had failed. They were moving to Plan B, and Plan B was going to be ugly. The war did not begin with a subpoena. It began with a Facebook notification. 3 days after the confrontation at the coffee shop, my phone lit up with an alert. Tinsley had tagged me in a post. My stomach tightened as I opened the app, bracing myself for another picture of her engagement ring or a venue tour. Instead, I saw a photograph of us from 5 years ago. It was from a Thanksgiving dinner, back before Noah got sick, back when I still smiled with my teeth showing. In the photo, I looked happy. In the caption, Tinsley had written a eulogy for my sanity, holding space today for those who cannot hold it for themselves. The caption read, "Grief is a monster that changes people. It breaks their minds and twists their reality. Please pray for my sister Madeline as she battles through this darkness. We are doing everything we can to help her find her way back to us, even when she pushes us away. Hashtag mental health awareness. Hashtag family first. Hashtag unconditional love." It was a masterpiece of weaponized empathy. To the outside world, it looked like a loving sister reaching out. To me, it was a declaration of incompetence. She was planting the seed in the public consciousness that I was broken, that I was pushing them away not because they were thieves, but because I was mentally unwell. The comment section was already filling up with prayer hands and heart emojis. "So brave of you to share." One comment read, "Stay strong. Tinsley, she is lucky to have you." Said another, "I threw the phone onto the passenger seat of my car. I was parked outside the grocery store. But suddenly, I did not want to go in. I felt exposed. When I finally forced myself to walk through the automatic doors, the air felt different. I ran into Mrs. Gable from down the street in the produce aisle. Usually, she would stop and ask about the weather. Today, she stopped, tilted her head, and looked at me with a gaze that was equal parts pity and fear. "Madeline," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I saw Tinsley's post. We are all rooting for you. Dear, if you ever feel overwhelmed, just know we are here." "I am fine, Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She took a step back, clutching her purse. Of course you are." She hurried away, leaving me standing next to the apples, realizing that the narrative had already taken hold. In her eyes, I was not a grieving mother. I was a ticking time bomb. Later that afternoon, the digital whispers turned into direct inquiries. I received a text message from Sarah, an old colleague from the marketing firm I had left when Noah got sick. We had not spoken in 6 months. "Hey, Maddie." The text read, "Weird question. Your sister Tinsley just called the office line. She was asking HR if there were any incidents of you being volatile or emotionally unstable before you resigned. I told them to hang up, but I thought you should know." My hands shook as I typed a reply. "Thank you. Sarah, please tell them to not answer anything." I called Miles immediately. He answered on the first ring. "They are building a case," Miles said, his voice grim after I read him the text. "They are conducting a smear campaign disguised as a wellness check. They are trying to find anyone who will go on record saying you have a history of instability. They want to prove that your grief is just the latest episode in a lifetime of mental fragility." "Can we stop them?" I asked. "We can send a cease and desist," Miles said. "But the damage to your reputation is harder to fix. They are trying to win the court of public opinion before we even step inside a courtroom." But the real blow came 2 hours later. My phone rang again. The caller ID showed the number for Children's Hospital. My heart leaped into my throat, a reflex from 2 years of living in terror of that number. I answered, expecting a billing question. "Ms. Ross?" a hesitant voice asked. "This is Sheila from the records department. I am calling to verify a request we just received for Noah Mercer's full medical history, including psychiatric evaluations and social worker notes." "I did not request that," I said, confused. "I know," Sheila said. "The request came from a Diane Ross. She submitted a copy of an intake form from 18 months ago that lists her as an emergency contact with authorization to view records. She claims she is acting on your behalf because you are indisposed." I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter until my knuckles turned white. An old form. When Noah was first diagnosed, I was drowning. I had filled out paperwork in a haze of terror. I must have put my mother down as a backup contact and never thought to remove her because I never imagined she would use my son's cancer records as ammunition against me. "She is not authorized," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "Revoke it. Revoke it all. If she gets a single page of those notes, I will sue the hospital for everything it is worth." "I will lock the file immediately," Sheila promised. The notes she was asking for specifically were the ones from the social worker, the ones about caregiver stress. I hung up, feeling violated in a way that made my skin crawl. They were hunting for moments of weakness. They were looking for the times I had cried in front of a social worker, the times I had confessed to being exhausted, the times I had said I did not know if I could go on. They wanted to take my most vulnerable moments as a mother and turn them into evidence of madness. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in the living room with the lights off, staring at the street, around 11 o'clock. My phone buzzed with a motion alert from the doorbell camera. I opened the app and watched the live feed in black and white. My mother and Tinsley were standing on my front porch. They were not ringing the bell. They were just standing there. Tinsley was whispering something to my mother, pointing at the dark windows. Then, on the screen, I saw my mother reach out. She put her hand on the door handle and slowly, quietly, depressed the latch. The door was locked. She tried it again, harder this time. It was not a visit. It was a test. They were checking to see if I was home, or maybe they were hoping I had left it unlocked so they could come in and check on me, or find something. I watched them on the screen. Two ghosts in designer coats, trying to break into the home of the daughter they had abandoned. After a minute, they turned and walked back to Tinsley's car, looking over their shoulders. I saved the footage. It was terrifying, but it was evidence. The hammer dropped the next morning at 8:30. A heavy knock rattled the front door. This time, it was not my family. It was a uniformed deputy from the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. "Madeline Ross?" he asked, holding a thick envelope. "Yes," I said. "You are being served," he said, handing me the packet. "Petition for emergency guardianship." I took the papers. They were heavy. I closed the door and slid down against it, sitting on the cold floor of the entryway as I tore open the seal. I scanned the legal jargon. Petitioner: Walter Ross and Diane Ross. Respondent: Madeline Ross. The allegations were laid out in bullet points that made my blood run cold. Respondent is incapacitated by pathological grief. Respondent has displayed erratic behavior and paranoia regarding family members. Respondent has threatened self-harm. A lie, a complete total lie. Respondent is engaging in financial mismanagement and is at risk of dissipating assets needed for her care. But the knife in the heart was the attached affidavit. It was signed by Maren Sloan. I read Maren's statement, and I felt the room spin. She had taken real moments and twisted them into something unrecognizable. On November 12th, the statement read, "I visited the hospital. Ms. Ross was found screaming at a vending machine in the hallway. She was unwashed and incoherent. She told me she believed the doctors were conspiring against her. She was unable to make basic decisions regarding lunch, let alone financial planning. She appeared detached from reality. I remembered that day. The vending machine had eaten my last dollar. I had not slept in 40 hours. I had kicked the machine once, out of frustration, and then cried because I was so tired. Maren had been there. She had hugged me. She had bought me a coffee. She had told me it was okay to let it out. Now, she was telling a judge that my exhaustion was psychosis. I lowered the papers. They had done it. They had filed. They had used my friends, my medical history, and my grief to build a cage. They thought this stack of papers would crush me. They thought reading Maren's betrayal would break my spirit. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen and placed the papers on the counter next to the logbook Loretta had given me. They had made one fatal error. They assumed that the Madeline who cried at the vending machine was the only Madeline who existed. They forgot about the Madeline who had fought insurance companies for 18 months. They forgot about the Madeline who had learned to read blood work charts better than some interns. I picked up my phone and dialed Miles. "They served me," I said. "I know," Miles replied. "I just saw the filing. Are you ready?" "I am done being sad, Miles," I said, looking at Maren's signature one last time. "I am ready to burn them down." They say that grief makes you blind, but in my experience, it acts more like a magnifying glass. It burns away the trivialities and leaves you staring at the jagged edges of reality. Sitting at my kitchen table with the guardianship petition spread out before me, I stopped crying. The tears were done. The panic was done. Now, I just had questions. Specifically, I had one question that refused to go away. Why the rush? Greed is patient. If my parents just wanted the money, they could have played the long game. They could have been supportive, waited for me to let my guard down, and slowly siphoned off the funds over years. But they were not doing that. They were sprinting toward the trust fund like people running from a fire. The desperation to get $60,000 for a venue deposit within 48 hours was not just about a wedding. It smelled like panic. I picked up my phone, but I did not call Miles. I called a favor. Before I became a full-time caretaker for Noah, I worked as a compliance analyst at a firm called Northbridge Risk and Compliance. My job was to look at people who claimed to have assets and find out if they were actually lying. I still had friends there, and one of them was a senior forensic accountant named Elena. "I need a background check," I told her when she picked up. "Public records only, nothing illegal. I need to know the debt-to-income ratio on my parents' address in Westbridge. And I need a deep dive on a man named Carter Vale." "Carter Vale?" Elena asked. "The guy Tinsley is marrying?" "The very same," I said. Something does not smell right. I spent the next 6 hours doing what I used to do best. I treated my own family as the subjects of an investigation. I logged into the county clerk's public database. I pulled property tax records. I looked for liens. The first domino fell within 20 minutes. The house in Westbridge, the one my parents treated like a castle, was drowning. I found a recorded deed of trust from 18 months ago. They had refinanced the home, pulling out nearly $200,000 in equity. That timeline aligned perfectly with when Noah got sick. But they had not stopped there. 6 months ago, they had taken out a second mortgage. The lender was not a traditional bank, but a private equity firm that specialized in high-risk loans with exorbitant interest rates. The loan document listed the purpose as home improvement and contractor fees. I sat back, staring at the screen. There had been no renovations. The kitchen was the same. The roof was the same. They had burned through over $250,000 in less than 2 years while I was sleeping in a hospital chair. They were not just living beyond their means. They were insolvent. Then Elena called me back. Her voice was low, the way it got when she found a smoking gun. "Maddie, are you sitting down?" she asked. "Tell me," I said. "Your parents are one thing," she said. "They are just typical suburbanites drowning in credit card debt and bad loans. But this fiancé, Carter Vale, he does not exist." "What do you mean he does not exist?" I asked, grabbing a pen. "I mean, Carter Vale is a ghost created 3 years ago," Elena explained. "But I ran a search on his social security number from a civil docket filing. Before 2023, his name was Carter Vance, and Carter Vance has a record. Not criminal, but civil, heavy civil." She sent a document to my email. I opened it. It was a court filing from a neighboring county. Plaintiff versus Carter Vance. The lawsuit was for breach of contract and misappropriation of funds. Carter had been sued for taking a $40,000 deposit for a real estate investment scheme that never materialized. The case was settled out of court, likely with a non-disclosure agreement, but the initial complaint was public record. "He is a con artist," I whispered. "He is not a developer. He is a grifter. And he is in deep," Elena added. "I found 3 other judgments against him under the old name. Small amounts, 5,000 here, 10,000 there. He changes his name, cleans up his image, finds a new mark, and starts over. Tinsley is the new mark, or maybe she is the accomplice." I looked at the picture of Tinsley and Carter on my sister's Instagram. He looked so polished in his tailored suit, his arm around her waist. He was not marrying her for love. He was marrying her because he thought she came with a trust fund. He was pressuring her for the wedding money because he probably owed money to people who were far less polite than the bank. But the investigation took a darker turn when I started going through my own piles of mail, the ones I had ignored while planning the funeral. I found a letter from the post office. It was a confirmation of a change of address request. Temporary forwarding for Noah Mercer. I froze. Noah was 9. He did not get mail. But someone had requested that any mail addressed to him be temporarily forwarded to the Westbridge address. The request was dated 2 weeks before he died. I realized with a sick jolt what they were looking for. They were fishing. They were looking for bank statements, dividend checks from the trust, or maybe pre-approved credit offers they could open in his name. Identity theft of a dying child. I drove to Loretta's house. I needed to see the physical evidence she had mentioned. Loretta was waiting for me. She handed me the leather-bound diary again, open to the very first page. "Read the entry from the day of the diagnosis," Loretta said softly. I looked at the date. It was the worst day of my life, the day the doctor told us the word leukemia. September 12th. Diagnosis confirmed. Madeline is in shock. Walter and Diane arrived at the hospital. While Madeline was in the bathroom vomiting from stress, Diane asked me a question. She asked if the life insurance policy was still active and if the trust paperwork had a clause for terminal illness. She did not ask if Noah was in pain. She asked about the paperwork. I closed the book. The coldness of it settled in my bones. "They knew," I said. "From the very beginning, they saw his cancer as a financial event." I took the diary, the printouts of the loans, and the dossier on Carter Vale to Miles Kerrigan's office an hour later, when I laid it all out on his desk. Miles did not look like a lawyer anymore. He looked like a shark smelling blood in the water. "This changes the entire landscape," Miles said, picking up the document about the second mortgage. "They filed for guardianship claiming you are fiscally irresponsible. Meanwhile, they are leveraged to the hilt and borrowing from predatory lenders. This proves motive. They do not need to protect you. They need to raid the trust to pay off their own debts. And Carter," I added, pointing to the name change record. "Carter is the accelerant," Miles agreed. "He is likely pressuring Tinsley, who is pressuring your parents. It is a house of cards, Madeline. And the trust fund is the only thing keeping it from collapsing." Miles stood up and walked to the whiteboard in his office. He picked up a red marker. "We are going to file a counter motion," he said, writing rapidly. "We are not just defending against the guardianship. We are going on the offensive. We are going to allege conspiracy to commit fraud. We are going to allege abuse of process, and with this change of address form regarding Noah's mail. We are going to hint at federal mail fraud." He turned to me. "They wanted to make this about your mental health. We are going to make it about their criminal liability. The hearing is in 3 days. By the time we are done, the judge will not be looking at your grief. He will be looking at their bank accounts." I looked at the board. The strategy was clear. It was precise. It was devastating. "Do it," I said. I realized then that the wedding was never about love. It was not even about status. It was a rescue mission. The white dress, the flowers, the expensive venue, it was all camouflage. They were drowning in debt, and they had looked at my son's death and seen a life raft. They wanted to paint me as a villain. Fine, I would be the villain. I would be the villain who tore their little scheme apart piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the truth, and the truth was going to cost them a lot more than $60,000. The conference room at Kerrigan and Lowe had transformed into a war room. The long mahogany table, usually reserved for polite settlements, was now buried under a blizzard of paper. Miles Kerrigan stood at the whiteboard, a marker in one hand, mapping out a timeline that looked less like a legal defense and more like a battle plan. We were not just building a case, we were building a fortress. "They are counting on the narrative that you were drowning," Miles said, drawing a sharp black line across the year 2024. "They want the judge to see a mother so consumed by grief that she lost her grip on reality. Our job is to show the judge that while you were grieving, you were also the most competent CEO in the room, the CEO of Noah Mercer's survival." He slapped a thick binder onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "Exhibit A," he announced. "The medical timeline. We had compiled 18 months of records, every single chemotherapy appointment, every radiation session, every pharmacy run. I had kept everything. Not because I was organized, but because insurance companies look for any excuse to deny coverage. The binder contained hundreds of pages of correspondence where I had fought denials, negotiated down billing codes, and coordinated complex care schedules across 3 different specialist departments. An incapacitated person does not cross-reference billing codes at 3 in the morning, Miles said, tapping the binder. A person in a psychotic break does not successfully appeal a denied claim for experimental immunotherapy. This proves high-level cognitive function under extreme duress. Next to the medical binder lay Loretta's affidavit. It was the emotional anchor of our defense. Loretta had come in earlier that morning, her face grim but determined. She had sat in this very chair and sworn under oath to the reality of our nights. Her statement was devastating in its simplicity. She detailed the nights she sat with me while I monitored Noah's temperature every hour on the hour. She described how I meal prepped specific, nutrient-dense foods when Noah could barely eat. She stated, unequivocally, that she had never seen me lose my temper, neglect a hygiene task, or miss a dose of medication. They have Maren Sloan saying you cried at a vending machine, Miles said, picking up Loretta's signed document. We have a retired nurse saying you performed medical-grade care in your living room for 500 days straight. Credibility is a currency. Madeline, and Maren is overdrawn. But the real weapon was the digital trail from the hospital. Miles opened his laptop and spun it around. The hospital's IT department came through. We have the access logs for Noah's electronic health record. I leaned in, looking at the spreadsheet. It was a list of user IDs, dates, and timestamps. Here, Miles pointed to a cluster of entries from last week. This user ID belongs to a billing administrator who has been on leave for 2 months. But the login location? It was not the hospital. It was a residential IP address in Westbridge. My mother, I whispered. She used an old contact to fish for information. And we found a nurse willing to testify, Miles added. Nurse Brenda. She was the floor manager during Noah's last stay. She remembers your mother calling the nurses' station and trying to impersonate you to get test results. Brenda shut her down. She is willing to go on record that the instability came from the grandmother, not the mother. We also had a letter from Mrs. Albright, Noah's 3rd-grade teacher. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking document. She wrote about how I had emailed her every week to keep Noah included in class projects, even when he could not leave his bed. She described how I had organized a video call so the class could sing him happy birthday. She called me the most engaged and fierce advocate for a child's normality she had ever seen. We have the wall, Miles said, stepping back to admire the layout of evidence. Now we need the spear. He turned to the timeline on the whiteboard. He circled 2 dates in red. Tuesday, the funeral. Wednesday, the demand. This is where we kill their motive, Miles said, his voice dropping to a predatory growl. Juries and judges can forgive a lot of family drama. They can forgive greed, but they cannot forgive hypocrisy. We are going to hammer this point until the judge is sick of hearing it. They were too distraught to attend the burial, but 24 hours later, they were composed enough to draft a legal demand for $850,000. That is not grief. That is a transaction. The door to the conference room opened, and Miles's paralegal, a young woman named Sarah, rushed in. Her face was pale. She was holding a tablet. Mr. Kerrigan, she said, her voice tight. You need to see this. It just hit the inbox of the Columbus Gazette. My friend in the editorial department tipped me off. Miles took the tablet. His eyes scanned the screen, and his expression hardened into stone. He handed it to me. It was a draft of a press release, formatted as a human interest story pitch. The headline read, "A Family's Plea. Local grandparents fight to save grieving daughter from financial ruin." The text was a masterpiece of twisted facts. It painted my parents as saintly figures, stepping in to conserve the remaining assets of their late grandson, because his mother had succumbed to the dark pressures of loss. It mentioned concerning behavior and erratic spending. It even had a quote from an unnamed close family friend, undoubtedly Maren, saying, We just want Maddie to get the help she needs before she loses everything. I felt the blood drain from my face. They were not just fighting me in court. They were trying to destroy me in the supermarket, at the bank, in my own neighborhood. They wanted to make sure that even if I won the money, I would lose my standing in the community. They wanted to shame me into submission. They are trying to try this case in the media because they know they will lose in court, Miles said, tossing the tablet onto the table. This is a pressure tactic. They think if they humiliate you enough, you will sign the settlement just to make it stop. I do not care about what people think, I said, though my hands were shaking. I do, Miles snapped. He turned back to his laptop and began typing furiously. Sarah, get the judge on the line. We are filing an emergency motion for a gag order. We are going to allege witness tampering and intent to taint the jury pool, and we are going to attach this press release as Exhibit Z. This proves malice. They are not trying to protect you. They are trying to blackmail you. I sat there, surrounded by the paper trail of my life, the medical bills, the teacher's notes, the letters from the insurance companies. Each piece of paper represented a moment where I had swallowed my fear and fought for Noah. Each document was a testament to the love that my family was now trying to twist into madness. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small silver locket I wore every day. Inside was a picture of Noah, smiling, taken just before his hair fell out. I ran my thumb over the cool metal. They thought they could use his memory against me. They thought they could use my pain as a weapon. They thought that because I was a grieving mother, I was weak. They did not understand that grief is just love with nowhere to go. And right now, my love was fueling a fire that would burn their lies to ash. Let them publish it, I said quietly. Miles stopped typing and looked at me. What? Let them try, I said, looking at the picture of my son. They want to turn my pain into a file. They want to turn my life into a headline. Fine, but they are forgetting one thing. I looked up at Miles, and I knew my eyes were dry. I am the one with the truth, I said, and I am going to turn that truth into a wall so high and so thick that when they crash into it, they will shatter. I will get the injunction, Miles said, a grim smile touching his lips. But you are right. Let them come. We are ready. The room was silent again, save for the hum of the hard drive and the scratching of Miles's pen. The wall was built. The evidence was stacked. The strategy was set. They had missed the funeral. They had demanded the money. And now, they had tried to sell my tragedy to the newspapers. They had no idea what was waiting for them in courtroom 4B. The digital clock on my microwave read 11:45 at night. The house was dark, save for the blue glow of the security monitor in the hallway and the single lamp burning on my kitchen table where I sat. Staring at the empty space where Noah's high chair used to be, the silence was absolute, the kind of heavy, pressurized quiet that precedes a storm. Tomorrow morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, I would walk into a courtroom and face the people who shared my bloodline in a battle for my sanity and my son's legacy. I was not sleeping. I was not pacing. I was simply waiting. When the doorbell rang, the sound tore through the house like a gunshot. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden, violent rhythm. Who comes to a grieving mother's door 15 minutes before midnight? I grabbed my phone, opening the security app before I even stood up. The grainy black and white feed showed a solitary figure standing on the porch. She was hugging herself against the night chill. Her head bowed. It was Tinsley. She was alone. No parents. No Maren Sloan. Just my little sister, shivering in a thin hoodie that looked like it belonged to a teenager. Not a bride-to-be. I walked to the front door, my bare feet silent on the hardwood. I unlocked the deadbolt with a heavy click, but I did not undo the chain. I opened the door 4 inches, the metal chain pulled taut, a silver line drawn between her world and mine. "Maddie," she whispered. Her voice was wet, thick with tears. She looked up, and I saw that her eyes were red and swollen. She was not wearing makeup. For the first time in years, she looked like the sister I remembered from childhood. Before the weddings and the debt, and the desperate need for validation. Please, I just need to talk to you. Sister to sister. We do not have anything to say that cannot be said in court tomorrow, I said, my voice cold. I kept my hand on the doorframe, ready to slam it shut. No, please, she begged, pressing her face near the crack in the door. Mom and Dad, they are going too far. I know that. I hate this. I hate that we are fighting. I just want it to stop. Maddie, I want us to be a family again. I looked at her. Part of me, the part that had spent a lifetime protecting her from our parents' narcissism, wanted to unhook the chain. I wanted to let her in and make her tea. But then I remembered the Instagram post. I remembered the sponsorship deals. I remembered the emptiness of the chairs at the funeral. If you want it to stop, I said, tell Dad to withdraw the petition. He cannot, Tinsley sniffed, wiping her nose with her sleeve. He is too proud. You know how he is. But we can fix this. Just you and me. She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. If you sign the voluntary transfer tonight, just a simple paper giving me trusteeship, I will make them drop the guardianship suit tomorrow morning. I promise. No court, no public records, no doctors analyzing your brain. You can just go back to grieving in peace. We will handle the burden of the money. The burden, I repeated. You want to relieve me of the burden of $850,000. It is for your own good, she insisted, her eyes wide and pleading. You are not thinking straight. You are going to blow it all on charities or something impulsive. But if I manage it, look, Carter has a plan. He knows how to restructure the trust. And then, she said it. The words slipped out of her mouth, greased by desperation and arrogance. Once the judge signs off on the transfer, we can reclassify the assets, she said, almost breathlessly. We can dip into the principal immediately. We do not have to wait for interest payments. We can clear the venue costs, pay off Dad's loan, and invest the rest in Carter's development project. It is a win-win. You get peace. We get the liquidity we need. You will not even have to think about the money. You will not have the right to say anything about it anyway. So it is less stress for you. I froze. The cold night air rushing through the crack in the door suddenly felt like ice water. Dip into the principal, I echoed. The trust is structured to protect the principal for 20 years. It is designed to generate income, not to be liquidated. Well, that is why we need you to sign, Tinsley said, her voice sharpening, losing its pitiful edge. The lawyer said if you sign it over voluntarily, we can amend the bylaws. We can use the heavy cash. The principal. That is the only way this works. Maddie, we need the big numbers, not the monthly drip. I stared at her. There it was. The confession. They did not want to manage the trust. They wanted to gut it. They wanted to crack open the piggy bank that was my son's life and scatter the coins to pay for their mistakes. You are admitting it, I said, my voice trembling not with fear, but with a terrible, clarifying rage. You are admitting that you plan to drain the fund. That is illegal. Tinsley, that is a violation of fiduciary duty. Tinsley's face changed. The sad little sister vanished, replaced by the cornered animal I had seen at the coffee shop. Her eyes narrowed. Do not talk to me about laws, she hissed. You are the one who is crazy. Do you think I want to do this? You are forcing us. And if you do not sign that paper right now, I swear to God, Maddie, I will destroy you tomorrow. Is that a threat? I asked. It is a promise, she spat. I will take the stand. I will tell them about the time you screamed at the night nurse because she was 5 minutes late with the pain meds. I will tell them about how you stopped showering for 3 days in November. I will paint a picture of you so unstable, so hysterical, that you will never be allowed to handle a checkbook again. I will call it a manic episode. I will make sure the whole town knows you lost your mind when Noah died. She paused, breathing hard, her breath pluming in the cold air. Or, she said, softening her voice again, a grotesque mimicry of kindness. You sign the paper, and we never speak of your breakdown again. We protect your dignity. I looked at her. I looked at the sister I had once shared a bedroom with, the girl I had taught to braid hair. She was gone. In her place was a creature made of debt and entitlement, willing to sell my trauma to buy a wedding venue. I looked directly into the lens of the doorbell camera, ensuring the red recording light was visible. Then I looked back at her. "You are standing on my porch," I said, my voice low and steady. "Bargaining with the honor of my dead son. You are using the worst moments of my life, the moments where I was breaking in half watching my child die, as leverage to pay for a party." "I am trying to save you," she cried out. "No," I said. "You are trying to save yourself, and you just buried yourself." "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "Go home, Tinsley," I said. "Get off my property, and tell Carter he better have a good lawyer." "You are making a mistake," she screamed as I started to close the door. "You are going to lose everything. We will humiliate you." I slammed the door shut. I threw the deadbolt. My hands were shaking, but not from weakness. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, listening to her pound on it once, twice, before retreating into the night. I waited until I heard her car engine start and fade away down the street. Then, I pulled out my phone. I opened the security app and downloaded the clip from the last 10 minutes. I attached the file to a message and sent it to Miles Kerrigan. She came to the house. I typed, "She offered a quid pro quo, and she admitted they planned to liquidate the principal." The response from Miles came 30 seconds later. I just listened to the audio. His text read, "Good God." She handed it to us on a silver platter. "We can dip into the principal. That is intent to defraud the beneficiary. That is the end of their case. Madeline, it is the end of everything for them." I walked into the kitchen and sat down in the dark. I touched the locket around my neck. Tinsley thought she had brought a weapon to my door. She thought her threats of humiliation would break me. She did not realize that when you have already lost the most important thing in your world, you have nothing left to fear. She had come to bury me. Instead, she had just dug her own grave. "Tomorrow," I whispered to the empty room. "Tomorrow we finish it." Courtroom 4B smelled of floor wax, old wood, and the stale anxiety of 100 broken families who had sat in these pews before us. When I walked in, keeping my eyes fixed on the back of Miles Kerrigan's suit jacket, I felt the air pressure change. On the left side of the aisle sat my family. Walter, Diane, Tinsley, and Maren Sloan were arranged like a tableau of concerned aristocracy. They were dressed in muted tones of charcoal and navy, their faces composed into masks of reluctant sorrow. To a stranger, they looked like loving relatives forced into a difficult position. To me, they looked like actors waiting for their cue. Their lawyer, a man named Sterling who wore a suit that cost more than my car, wasted no time in painting the picture they had designed. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice dripping with faux compassion, "we are not here to punish Ms. Ross. We are here to save her. The respondent has suffered a tragedy that no mother should endure. However, this trauma has resulted in a complete break from reality. She is spending erratically. She is paranoid. She is refusing the help of the only support system she has. We simply ask for temporary guardianship to ensure that the significant assets in the trust are not squandered during this period of acute mental instability." It was a good story. It was simple, logical, and completely false. First up was Maren Sloan. She took the stand, smoothing her skirt, avoiding my eyes. Sterling led her through the questions gently. She recounted the vending machine incident. She described me crying in the hospital hallway. She used words like hysterical and unreachable. She just seemed to lose all sense of proportion. Maren testified, her voice soft. "I was terrified for her safety." "Thank you, Ms. Sloan," Sterling said. Miles stood up. He did not walk toward the witness stand. He stayed behind his table, leaning on his knuckles. "Ms. Sloan," Miles said, his voice carrying to the back of the room. "You testified that you are deeply concerned for Madeline's well-being, that you are practically family." "Yes," Marin said. "We have been friends since high school." "I see," Miles said. "And as her closest friend. Surely you were present to support her at her son's funeral last Tuesday?" The silence that followed was absolute. Marin shifted in her seat. Her eyes darted to Tinsley, then back to Miles. "I was unable to attend," she stammered. "Unable?" Miles pressed. "Were you ill? Were you out of the country?" "No," Marin whispered. "So you were in town," Miles said. "In fact, were you not at the Halcyon Ballroom with the petitioners, planning a wedding reception at the exact moment Noah Mercer was being buried?" "Objection!" Sterling shot up. "Relevance?" "The relevance goes to credibility, Your Honor," Miles shot back. "The witness claims to be acting out of deep concern for the respondent, yet she chose a party over a funeral. It establishes bias and suggests her testimony regarding my client's mental state is tailored to fit the petitioner's narrative." "Overruled," the judge said, peering at Marin over his glasses. "Answer the question." "I was at the venue," Marin admitted, her face flushing pink. "No further questions," Miles said. He then moved to the financial allegations. Sterling had submitted a spreadsheet of my erratic spending. Miles countered with the binders we had prepared. He walked the judge through the 18 months of treatment. The petitioners claim Ms. Ross is fiscally irresponsible, Miles argued, holding up a stack of receipts. But every single transaction they have flagged corresponds to a copay, a medication not covered by insurance, or specialized dietary requirements for a child undergoing chemotherapy. This is not the spending of a manic person. This is the spending of a mother keeping her dying child alive in a broken healthcare system. Then came the first heavy blow. Miles called the hospital's IT administrator to the stand. The testimony was dry, technical, and devastating. The witness confirmed that Noah's records had been accessed 3 days ago using my mother's old emergency contact credentials, specifically looking for social worker notes. This was an unauthorized fishing expedition, Miles told the judge. The petitioners were not looking for medical history to help Noah. They were looking for ammunition to use against Madeline. Walter and Diane sat rigid, their composure beginning to crack. But the real storm was about to break. "Your Honor," Miles said, "we have one final piece of evidence regarding the petitioner's true motivation. Last night, at 11:45, Tinsley Ross visited the respondent's home. We have a verified security recording of that interaction." Sterling tried to object, claiming it was inadmissible, but Miles cited the relevant statutes regarding recordings where one party is aware, and the judge allowed it. The courtroom fell silent as Miles tapped his laptop. Tinsley's voice, clear and sharp, filled the high-ceilinged room. "Once the judge signs off on the transfer, we can reclassify the assets. We can dip into the principal immediately. We do not have to wait for interest payments. We can clear the venue costs, pay off Dad's loan, and invest the rest in Carter's development project." The color drained from Tinsley's face so fast, I thought she might faint. A gasp rippled through the gallery. The judge's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the defense table. "Dip into the principal," the recording continued. "You will not even have to think about the money. You will not have the right to say anything about it anyway." Miles stopped the playback. "The trust is legally structured to preserve the principal until the beneficiary is 25. Miles said to the room, "The petitioners are not seeking guardianship to protect the funds. They are seeking it to loot the funds. They have explicitly stated their intent to commit fiduciary fraud." Sterling looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. He whispered furiously to Walter, who was now staring straight ahead, a vein throbbing in his temple. "But we are not done," Miles said. "The recording mentioned an investment in a Carter's development project. This refers to Mr. Carter Vale, the fiancé of Tinsley Ross." Miles picked up a final document. "We ran a background check on Mr. Vale," Miles said. "It appears that Carter Vale is a pseudonym. His birth name is Carter Vance, and under that name, he has been the defendant in 3 separate civil suits regarding misappropriation of investment deposits in the last 4 years. He walked to the judge's bench and handed over the file. "The wedding is not just a celebration, Your Honor," Miles declared, turning to look directly at Tinsley. "It is a deadline. They need the trust fund to cover the deposits for a luxury wedding they cannot afford, and likely to pay off debts incurred by Mr. Vance's previous failed ventures. They are using this court to facilitate a robbery." The courtroom erupted. Tinsley let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. Diane reached for her, but Walter pulled away, looking at his daughter with pure venom. The judge slammed his gavel down. "Order! Order in this court!" When the room quieted, the judge looked at the petitioners. His face was no longer neutral. It was thunderous. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice dangerously low, "your clients are asking me to believe that they are the responsible parties here. Yet, I have evidence that they missed a funeral to tour a party venue. I have evidence that they attempted to illegally access medical records. And I have a recording of them plotting to violate the terms of the trust they are asking to control." He paused, looking directly at Walter Ross. "You missed the funeral on Tuesday," the judge stated, "but you sent a demand for the trust papers on Wednesday morning. Why?" Walter stood up, his face red. "Your Honor, we were trying to secure the future. My daughter is not well." "Sit down," the judge barked. "I have seen enough. The timeline speaks for itself. This was never about mental health. This was about liquidity." The atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. 10 minutes ago, they were the concerned family trying to save me. Now they were exposed for exactly what they were, parasites who had tried to feed on the carcass of my tragedy. I looked at Tinsley. She was weeping, but no one was comforting her. Carter was not there. He had wisely stayed away. Marin was staring at the floor, probably already calculating how this would affect her business reputation. My parents looked small, shrunken by the weight of the truth. They had come here to strip me of my rights. Instead, Miles had stripped them of their masks. The silence in the room was not the silence of grief anymore. It was the silence of judgment, and it was deafening. The silence that followed the judge's final words was not empty. It was heavy, like a physical weight settling over the courtroom. He did not just deny their petition, he incinerated it. "The petition for emergency guardianship is dismissed with prejudice," the judge announced, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "That means you are barred from ever filing a similar motion against Ms. Ross in this court again. Furthermore, based on the evidence of witness tampering, unauthorized access to medical records, and stated intent to defraud a trust, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for a criminal investigation regarding perjury and violation of privacy laws." He looked over his spectacles at my father, who had turned a pale, sickly shade of gray. "I am also granting the respondent's request for a permanent restraining order," the judge continued. "Walter Ross, Diane Ross, Tinsley Ross, and Marin Sloan are to have no contact with Madeline Ross, either directly or through third parties. If you violate this order, you will be arrested. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down with a sound that felt like a rib snapping back into place. I sat there for a moment, letting the breath I had been holding for 3 weeks finally leave my lungs. Beside me, Miles Kerrigan closed his laptop with a satisfied click. He did not smile, but he gave a small, sharp nod. We had not just won, we had ended it. I stood up and turned to leave. I did not look at them. I walked down the center aisle, my head high, the sound of my heels on the floor steady and sure. I pushed through the double doors into the bright, crowded hallway of the courthouse. But the drama was not quite over. As I stepped into the corridor, I saw a commotion near the elevators. A man in a sharp suit was trying to push past a group of uniformed officers. It was Carter Vale. He must have been waiting outside, too cowardly to sit in the courtroom, but eager to hear if he had secured his payday. "Mr. Carter Vance?" a deputy asked loudly, blocking his path. "My name is Vale," Carter snapped, adjusting his tie nervously, "and I am in a hurry." "We have a warrant for a Carter Vance regarding 3 counts of felony fraud and theft by deception involving real estate deposits," the officer said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs, "and we have a summons for a civil suit regarding the Halcyon Ballroom deposit." The color drained from Carter's face. He looked around wildly, his eyes locking onto Tinsley, who had just stumbled out of the courtroom behind me, followed by our parents. "Tinsley!" Carter yelled, as the officers spun him around. Tell them the money is coming." Tinsley froze. She looked at her fiancé, then at the handcuffs, and then at the group of reporters who had gathered near the stairs. The wedding, the white dress, the magazine feature, the perfect life she had tried to build on my son's grave, disintegrated in seconds. It was like watching a backdrop fall on a stage, revealing the rotting wood behind it. "You said you had investors," Tinsley screamed at him, her voice cracking. "You said you were wealthy." "I needed the bridge loan," Carter shouted back as they led him away. "You said your sister was an easy mark." The hallway went silent. Tinsley turned to our parents, her face twisted in ugly, raw fury. "This is your fault," she shrieked at Walter. "You said the guardianship was a sure thing. You said Miles Kerrigan was a pushover. Now look at this. My wedding is gone. My life is over." "Do not speak to your father that way," Diane hissed, though she was looking around frantically, trying to hide her face from the onlookers. "You are the one who picked a criminal for a fiancé. You dragged us into this mess." "I dragged you?" Tinsley laughed, a manic, broken sound. "You have been spending money you do not have for years. You needed this just as much as I did." They were eating each other alive. The united front that had stood in my living room demanding my surrender was now tearing itself apart in a public corridor. It was pathetic. It was tragic. And it was exactly what they deserved. I walked past them. I did not stop. I did not yell. I just paused for 1 second as I passed the huddle of my former family. "Noah is not here to be used anymore," I said quietly. They stopped arguing and looked at me. For a second, I saw the realization hit them. Not just that they had lost the money, but that they had lost me. They had lost the only person who had ever actually loved them without conditions. I walked out the front doors and into the sunlight. The air tasted clean. In the months that followed, the wreckage of the Ross family continued to burn. The investigation into the medical records breach resulted in heavy fines for the hospital and a suspended license for the nurse who had helped my mother. My father lost his job when the news of the perjury investigation hit the local papers. Ironically, the same papers they had tried to use to smear me. Tinsley moved to another state, leaving behind a mountain of debt and a canceled wedding that became local gossip fodder for months. I did not celebrate their downfall. I simply moved on. I kept my promise to Noah. The $850,000 did not go to a wedding. It did not go to a house. It went to work. With Miles's help, I established the Noah Mercer Foundation. We did not build a new wing for a hospital. We did the small, invisible things that save people. We created a fund that paid for gas cards for parents driving 2 hours for chemotherapy. We paid for hotel rooms for families who could not afford to stay near the ICU. We covered the cost of takeout meals for mothers who were too exhausted to cook after sitting in a radiation waiting room for 6 hours. Loretta Pike became my first volunteer. She ran the coordination desk, matching families with resources, her stern but loving voice becoming a lifeline for hundreds of women just like me. We built a new family, not one of blood, but of shared scars and survival. 1 year later, on a Tuesday morning, I drove back to Maple Hollow Cemetery. The sky was blue this time, a brilliant, piercing azure that hurt my eyes in the best way. The grass on Noah's grave had grown in thick and green. I did not feel the crushing weight I had felt the year before. I felt a dull ache, the kind that never really goes away, but it was an ache I could carry. I was strong enough to carry it now. I knelt down and placed a small plastic astronaut on the headstone, right next to the one I had left the day of the funeral. "I did it, baby," I whispered. "Nobody took your legacy. It is safe. You are helping them. You are fixing the other kids, just like you said." I stayed there for a long time, just listening to the wind in the trees. As I stood up to leave, I saw a woman walking toward me. She was holding the hand of a little girl who was bald, wearing a bright pink beanie. The woman looked tired, that specific, bone-deep exhaustion I knew so well. She stopped when she saw me. She looked at the name on the headstone, and then up at my face. Her eyes widened. "Are you Madeline?" she asked hesitantly. "Yes," I said. The woman's face crumbled, and she stepped forward, pulling me into a hug that was fierce and desperate. "Thank you," she sobbed into my shoulder. "Thank you. The grant it paid for our rent last month. We were going to lose the apartment while she was in transplant. You saved us. You let me stay with her." I held her tight, feeling her tears soak into my coat. I looked over her shoulder at the little girl in the pink hat, who was waving at Noah's headstone. My family had wanted to steal the money to buy an image of happiness. They had wanted to use my son's death to pay for a lie, but they had failed. What they wanted was currency. What I had kept was a legacy. And standing there in the sunlight, holding a stranger who felt like a sister, I knew that Noah was smiling. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I know it was an emotional ride, and I would love to hear your thoughts. Please comment down below and tell me where you are listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people who might need to hear it.